George never thought his life would turn out this way. He was the kind of man who planned everything meticulously, a lawyer by profession, and a strategic thinker by nature. He and April had been married for 6 years, and on the surface, everything seemed perfect. Both had successful careers, George at a prestigious law firm, and April working as a marketing executive at a tech company. They had no kids by choice, choosing instead to focus on their careers and travel. They had built a beautiful life together, or so he thought. Things started to change a few months ago, though said April became more distant. It was subtle at first. She would come home later than usual, claiming work had gotten busier, or she had drinks with colleagues, or George tried to be understanding. He knew how demanding her job could be, and he'd always trusted her. But there was something different now. She seemed distracted, her laughter wasn't as genuine, and she barely initiated any affection. They hadn't had sex in weeks, and it wasn't like April to be so disinterested. The one evening, George sat in their living room, flipping through TV channels while April was out for another work event. The room felt unusually quiet, and for the first time in a long time, he felt truly alone. He had the nagging feeling that something wasn't right, but he didn't want to confront her about it yet. He wasn't the type to jump to conclusions. No, George patient, methodical, and he needed proof before he could act on his suspicions. That's when the first clue arrived. He noticed April had left her phone at each encounter before she left, something she never did. She was usually glued to it. He glanced at it absentmindedly at first, but a notification caught his eye, an email from someone named Steve. The preview of the message was harmless enough, but it wasn't the name of anyone George recognized from April's work stories. So a creeping suspicion began to form in his mind. George felt his stomach twist as he picked up the phone. They hesitated for a moment. They had always respected each other's privacy, but this was different. His gut told him something was wrong. When he unlocked the phone and saw the full email, the bottom dropped out of his world. The email was short, but it said enough, "Can't wait to see you tomorrow. Last night was unforgettable." Though his heart pounded as he scrolled through their exchange, and his worst fears were confirmed. Steve wasn't just a colleague. Their emails were filled with inside jokes, shared secrets, and worse talk of intimate moments. George felt sick. His pulse quickened as he read how they planned to meet up during work trips, how they had been sneaking around for months. But George didn't explode in anger. No, that wasn't his style. Instead, a calm washed over him. There he put the phone down and sat there for a while, staring at the wall. His thoughts raced, but they were organized, methodical. He knew he couldn't confront her yet. He needed to be smart about this. He needed to collect evidence just like he would for a court case. But only this time the court was his life, and the defendant was his wife. Over the next few weeks, George became a man on a mission, though April had no idea. He took screenshots of the emails, forwarded them to himself, and even printed them out. He started tracking her movements more closely, noting the time she said she was working later out with friends. George knew something was going on, and he wanted to gather enough evidence so that when he confronted her, there would be no way for her to wriggle out of it. He wasn't just preparing for a fight, he was preparing for a divorce. Then, one evening, George decided to take things a step further. He placed a small camera in their bedroom, hidden in a spot where it would go unnoticed. So April had left for another work trip, this time supposedly to Los Angeles. George didn't believe her for a second. He had noticed that these trips seemed to coincide with Steve's supposed business trips, and his suspicion had grown into certainty. He needed video evidence now, something undeniable. When April returned from her trip, she was her usual self, distant, distracted, always on her phone. George played along, pretending like everything was normal, all the while gathering more evidence. He didn't ask her how her trip was, he didn't care anymore. He just wanted to get to the point where he could finally pull the rug out from under her. But George wasn't going to just let her go. No, he had bigger plans. He started consulting with his real estate agent about selling their house, their beautiful sprawling home that April loved so much. But of course, he didn't tell her about it. He crafted legal documents, tricking April into signing away her share of the property under the guise of refinancing the mortgage. She signed without a second thought, trusting George completely. George almost felt sorry for her, but he buried that pity deep down. She had made her bed. Now she would have to lie in it. At the same time, George began crafting his exit strategy. He knew the divorce was inevitable, but he didn't want to walk away with just his pride intact. He wanted the house, the cars, the investments, everything they had built together. And with April none the wiser, he started preparing the paperwork to make it happen. The betrayal hadn't been revealed yet, but George could feel it hanging in the air like a storm cloud, ready to burst. He knew the day would come soon when he would have everything in place, when he could confront her and watch as her perfect world crumbled. Little did April know that her trip to Paris with Steve would be the final nail in the coffin of their marriage. So the days passed, I found myself almost relishing the duplicity I was living in. So I smiled at April when she came home late, kissed her goodbye in the mornings, all while knowing the truth she didn't think I was smart enough to uncover. It was like being on the opposite side of a chessboard, already knowing the final move. April had no clue. In fact, she seemed more relaxed around me, almost like she had convinced herself that I was too naive to notice her late night texting, or her sudden interest in work trips. She must have thought she had me fooled, and maybe that made her careless. Or maybe she just didn't care anymore. I wasn't entirely surprised when she announced she had another conference in Paris coming up, so this time she didn't even offer any details. I watched her pack with little interest as she tossed in dresses, heels, and lingerie that I hadn't seen in years. She probably thought she was being clever, but I could see through her little facade. Steve would be in Paris too, of course. I'd confirmed that through the casual browsing of her emails, the ones she thought were deleted. The house had been quiet lately. We weren't fighting exactly, but there was a strange coldness between us. Conversations became shorter. She didn't even bother to ask about my day anymore, and I was fine with that. The less we talked, the easier it was to keep my plan in motion. She was so wrapped up in her little affair with Steve that she didn't see the web tightening around her. By now, I had it all. The printouts of her emails, the screenshots from her phone, the bank statements that showed suspicious net stip purchase I hadn't authorized. And of course, the videotape. The camera I had installed in our bedroom had confirmed everything I needed to know. And while she was out in Paris with Steve, I'd be finalizing the sale of our home. Don't think I hadn't told her yet, of course. That was part of the beauty of my plan. The house was in both our names, but April, ever trusting, had signed over her stakes. That piece of paper meant I now had full control over the sale. It wasn't an easy process, but I'd maneuvered it like I handled a tough case in court, with precision and patience. But I wasn't just taking the house. No, I was taking everything. The accounts, the cars, the investments. April wouldn't see it coming until it was too late. While she was sipping champagne with Steve under the Parisian sun, I would be dismantling her life back here. And when she returned, well, that was when the real fun would begin. The nights alone became quieter but heavier. The silence was filled with anticipation, and Ikai was a man waiting to spring a trap, knowing that every moment of waiting would make the final reveal that much sweeter. As sometimes I thought back to how we used to be, happy, in love, or at least what I thought was love, it made it was never that real for her. I'll never know. The night before her trip to Paris, I lay awake beside her, listening to her slow, steady breathing. She had fallen asleep quickly, probably from the wine she'd guzzled earlier in the evening. She had always loved wine, especially after a long day of work. I glanced over at her in the dim light, wondering what had happened to the woman I had married. She looked peaceful in her sleep, innocent even. I almost felt pity, but then I remembered the emails, the videotape, the lies, and just like that, the pity was gone. I had spoken to my lawyer earlier, the dang divorce papers were ready. I had the documents for the house sale all set up too. She wouldn't even know it was sold until the money was already in my account. I'd put everything in motion, and now all I had to do was wait. So the trap was set. It was almost poetic, really. The same skills I'd honed in the courtroom were now working for me in real life. I didn't just want to leave her. I wanted her to feel the same sting of betrayal I'd felt, but unlike her, I was going to be smarter about it. There would be no messy fight, no screaming match, just cold, calculated destruction. April was giddy the next morning as she kissed me goodbye at the door, suitcase in hand. She looked like she was off on some grand adventure while I was left to play the role of the doting husband. And he smiled back, wished her a good trip, and watched her drive away. Little did she know that was the last time she'd see our house. As soon as she was gone, I got to work. The real estate agent came by, and the house was listed that afternoon. I had already started packing up some of my things, but I didn't bother with hers. She wouldn't need them when she came back. I couldn't wait to see her face when she realized it was all gone, her perfect little life shattered like glass. And over the next week, I stayed busy. I met with my lawyer, finalized the divorce paperwork, and started arranging the sale of the cars. So I didn't need them. Hell, I didn't even need the money. This wasn't about money anymore. This was about making sure she walked away with nothing. I spent that week living like I had a secret weapon. It felt exhilarating. It was like having an ace up my sleeve in the middle of a game where everyone thought they were winning. April was still sending me cheery texts from Paris, telling me how beautiful the city was, how much she loved the art and the food. She didn't mention Steve once, but I knew he was there. Her emails to him, the ones I had access to, told a different story. I didn't respond to most of her texts. I didn't need to. I was just counting down the days until she came home to find everything she loved ripped away from her. Part 3 would mark the moment where all the cracks I'd been patiently observing would finally shatter, and April would realize that everything she thought she had was nothing but smoke. April come home a week later, glowing from her time in Paris. I could tell from the way she breezed through the door that she thought everything was exactly how she left it. Her husband in line, her life neatly compartmentalized, and her lover just a hidden little secret. The illusion was about to break. "Hey babe," she called from the hallway, dropping her bags to the floor. "Paris was amazing. What if you should have seen the view from the hotel? Maybe next time we can go together." I almost laughed at the irony. The audacity of her acting as though everything was fine, as though I didn't know exactly who she had been with, was both infuriating and pathetic. But I played along for just a little while longer. I stepped into the hallway, leaning against the doorframe with an easy smile plastered on my face. "Yeah, sounds nice. How was the food?" I asked, as though I cared. She prattled on about croissants and fine dining, still completely oblivious to the storm that was about to hit her. I nodded along, letting her feel comfortable. It was almost impressive how well she hid the truth behind that fake smile of hers. But as she walked past me, I caught the faintest scent of cologne, one that wasn't mine, so was Steve's. Anyway, she said, pulling off her coat and tossing it over a chair, I'm exhausted. I think I'm going to take a long bath. Let's order takeout tonight. Yeah, I nodded, fighting back the urge to tell her that tonight was going to be a lot more than just takeout and Netflix. I waited until she was out of sight, then slipped upstairs to the bedroom. It was time. The email evidence I had gathered, the printouts, the photos from the security camera in our own home, it was all laid out neatly on the bed. Everything was arranged like a presentation. I didn't want there to be any ambiguity when the moment came. She had to see the full scope of her haze and deceit, every sort of detail staring her in the face. While she soaked in the tub, I waited. My heart wasn't racing anymore. I felt calm, colder than I'd ever been in my life. Though I didn't feel the pain of betrayal now. I only felt anticipation, a hunger to see the look on her face when it all came crashing down. She emerged from the bathroom in her bathrobe, towel wrapped around her hair, looking more relaxed than I'd seen. She froze the moment she saw the bed. Her eyes darted to the letters, the photos, the printed emails. For a moment, the room was dead silent, the weight of everything settling in. What is this? Her voice wavered. I stayed by the doorway, watching as her face contorted, first with confusion, then with fear, and finally with the crushing realization of what she was seeing. When you tell me, I said coolly, arms crossed, seems like you've got a lot of explaining to do. She blinked, her mouth opening and closing as if she was struggling to find the words. Her hands trembled as she reached for the photos. The pictures weren't the worst of it, though. It was the emails, the ones where she and Steve openly discussed their little rendezvous. They talked about me, about how easy it was to sneak around behind my back, how stupid they thought I was. So I can explain. Ain't here's that grumbled. It cut her off, my voice hard and sharp. Explain? Really? You're gonna stand there and try to explain your way out of this? She stumbled over her words, her face flushing with panic. George, it's not what it looks like, I swear. Steve, he's just a friend, and those emails? Don't, I snapped, stepping closer to her. Don't lie to me. I've got the emails. I've got the tapes. I've got everything. Her eyes widened in horror as the reality sank in. She took a step back, almost as if she thought she could escape this. But there was no running from the truth now. I watched her crumble, her entire facade falling apart. For a second, I thought she might cry, but instead she just stood there frozen like a deer caught in headlights. George, please, I can explain everything. She dropped the emails onto the bed and turned to face me. It wasn't serious. I never meant to go this far. It was a mistake, okay? I love you. I swear I do. It laughed then, an actual laugh that startled even me. A mistake. You've been screwing him for months, April. That's not a mistake. That's a choice. Over and over again. She started to shake, her eyes filling with tears now. Please, George. I'm sorry. I don't know what I was thinking. I wasn't thinking. I was lost. What to save it, I said, cutting her off. You weren't lost. You knew exactly what you were doing, or you thought you were smart enough to keep it hidden from me. You thought I wouldn't find out. She collapsed onto the edge of the bed, burying her face in her hands. What do you want me to say? I'm sorry. I made a mistake. Please don't leave me. For a moment, I said nothing, just watching her pathetic display. I felt nothing for her now. The love we had shared, if it was ever real, was long gone. All that remained was the cold, hard reality of her betrayal. You don't get it, do you? I said, my voice low and measured. This isn't about you begging for forgiveness. It's about you realizing that you've lost everything. Her head snapped up at that, her tear-filled eyes locking onto mine. What do you mean? I said, pulling a folded document from my jacket pocket, that you no longer own anything in this house. I sold it while you were in Paris with your lover. It's gone, April. The house, the cars, the money, it's all mine. She gasped, her hand shaking as she reached for the papers. Her face turned white as she realized what she was looking at. The transfer of assets, the sale of the house, it was all done, all legal, and there was nothing she could do about it. George, no, you can't. But I did, I said coldly. While you were off screwing Steve in Paris, I was busy taking everything. You're done here. The life you thought you had, it's over. She broke down then, sobbing into her hands, her whole body shaking with the force of it. I stood there watching her fall apart, feeling nothing but satisfaction. The trap had sprung and she was caught, but the fallout wasn't over yet. No, there was still more to come. She had no idea what was waiting for her and Steve when they returned from their little romantic getaway. Yet all this, the loss of her house, her money, her security, was just the beginning, and I wasn't going to stop until everything was gone. April didn't leave the house for 2 days after our confrontation. She didn't even speak to me. She just sulked, pacing through the empty rooms, as if walking around enough would somehow change the fact that she had lost everything. I would catch her occasionally staring out the windows, eyes wide and unfocused, like she was trying to figure out how she had been so stupid. And then she finally broke the silence. But where am I supposed to go, George? She asked one evening, her voice barely above a whisper. So it was pathetic. In pleiner, begered me per shake, I was sitting at the kitchen table, finishing my dinner. I didn't even look up when she spoke, just continued cutting into my steak like nothing had changed. So that's not my problem, April. She stood there for a moment, as if waiting for me to offer her some kind of lifeline. When I didn't, she slumped against the doorway, her shoulders sagging under the weight of it all. I made a mistake, George, she said softly. I know I screwed up, but I don't deserve this. So I put my fork down and finally looked at her. Don't you? My voice was colder than I had intended, but I didn't care. Now you threw this marriage away the moment you decided to sleep with him. You don't get to play the victim now? She flinched at my words but didn't respond. She knew better than to argue with me now. Instead, she turned and walked back into the living room, disappearing into the growing shadows of the evening. I let out a long breath, trying to release the tension that had built up in my chest. How this should have felt better, watching her suffer, knowing that she had nothing left. But part of me felt numb. A few hours later, I heard her pull out of the driveway. I didn't bother to ask where she was going. I assumed she was running to Steve, desperate for comfort now that her world was falling apart. That was fine by me. Let him deal with her now. I had done my part. The papers were filed. The house was gone. All I had to do now was wait for the final blow to land. And land it did. 2 nights later, I received a call that I wasn't expecting. It was from Steve's number. At first, I considered ignoring it. Why would he be calling me? But something about it piqued my curiosity. I answered, and the voice on the other end wasn't Steve's. It was April's. Her voice was trembling, panicked. George, something happened. I could hear the fear in her voice, but it didn't stir any sympathy in me. What do you want? I asked, my tone flat. So they attacked us? She said, her breech-icking. I don't know who they were, but they came after us. So me and Steve. So that got my attention. I sat up straighter, gripping the phone tighter. What the hell are you talking about? They were coming back from dinner, she explained, her voice shaky and fast. We were walking back to the hotel when the Weeze guys jumped us. Though I don't know who they were, but they beat Steve up really bad. And me, they did something to me. What do you mean did something? I asked, my mind racing now. There was a pause on the line, and I could hear her breathing raggedly, like she was on the verge of breaking down. They tattooed me, George, she finally whispered, all over my back. They held me down and tattooed me. And I felt a strange, sickening twist in my gut. Tattooed you? What the hell are you talking about? I said, it's horrible, she sobbed. It's all these words, George. Horrible words. Liar. Well, it's like knew everything. For the first time in weeks, I felt genuinely stunned. I hadn't seen this coming. Whoever had done this, it wasn't me. I hadn't planned for this. I hadn't hired anyone to attack them. But someone out there had taken matters into their own hands, and now April and Steve had paid the price. But you need to call the police, I said, trying to keep my voice steady. Report it. Get to a hospital. I can't, she cried. I'm too scared. I don't know what to do. I leaned back in my chair, my mind spinning. This wasn't part of my plan. I had wanted revenge. Yes, but this was something else entirely. Someone had taken it further than I ever intended. Where are you now? I asked, more out of habit than concern. We're at the hotel still, she whispered. Steve's hurt bad. I don't know what to do. And I rubbed my temples, trying to process the mess that was unfolding. I should have felt triumphant. April had been ruined. Her life was in shambles, but now all I felt was a growing sense of unease. Whoever had attacked him had left a message, not just on April's skin, but on both of them. And this wasn't just about her betrayal anymore. It was something darker, something I hadn't anticipated. Now look, I said, finally, you need to get Steve to a hospital. And you need to get out of there. Stay somewhere safe until you figure out what's going on. She sniffled, clearly still panicked. What about you? Can I come home? Oh, I laughed bitterly. April have a home anymore. You sold it. Remember, silence. That's when she realized there was no turning back, no safety net. She had burned every bridge, and now she was on her own. She mumbled something else, but I wasn't really listening anymore. I told her to take care of herself, then hung up. The phone dropped on the table with a thud, and I stared at it for a long while. I had thought I'd wanted revenge, to see her suffer for what she did to me. But this was something else. Whoever had attacked them had crossed a line I hadn't even drawn. For a moment, I wondered if Steve would survive his injuries. If he didn't, April's life would be destroyed even further, and not just emotionally. She'd be dragged through hell if this turned into a criminal investigation. I didn't know who had orchestrated the attack. Maybe it was karma. Maybe it was someone else who had been wronged by them. Whoever it was, they'd gone much further than I ever intended to. But even as those thoughts raced through my mind, I couldn't deny the small flicker of satisfaction that lingered in the back of my mind. April had betrayed me, broken everything we had built together. And now she was paying for it in ways even I couldn't have imagined. And I poured myself a drink, staring out the window into the darkness. April and Steve were out there somewhere nursing their wounds. And me, I was free from the lies, the betrayal, the bullshit. Whatever came next, it wouldn't involve her. And that, at least, was the sweetest victory of all. The finality of it all didn't hit me until the morning after April's frantic phone call. I woke up to a quiet house, no more sounds of her padding around the kitchen, no scent of her perfume lingering in the hallways. I had slept deeply, dreamlessly, as if my subconscious finally knew that the weight had been lifted. But when I stood in the middle of our no, My living room, I realized something strange. For all the planning, all the careful manipulation, and even for all the revenge I had sought, it still didn't feel real. The house felt hollow, empty. April was gone in every sense of the word. I turned on the TV, half hoping to distract myself from the bizarre sense of calm that had settled over me. The local news was on, and that's when I saw it. The headline at the bottom of the screen stopped me cold. Prominent tech executive and partner attacked in hotel, severe injuries reported. The news anchor's voice droned on as images flashed across the screen. There was Steve, barely recognizable, his face swollen and bruised, bandaged from head to toe as they wheeled him into the hospital. The camera lingered on April, just for a moment, as she tried to shield herself from view with a scarf draped over her head. She was walking beside Steve, looking utterly destroyed. But it wasn't just her face that caught my attention, it was what was barely visible beneath her coat. A glimpse of ink peeking out just along her collarbone. The tattoos, they hadn't blurred it out. It was there for everyone to see just for a second, but it was enough. The shame was plastered across her skin. The words, the insults, the truth she had hidden from me, now branded onto her body for the world to witness. I stared at the TV in disbelief. The footage looped again, showing Steve's broken body and April's pitiful attempt to hide her own degradation. The headline faded, and the story moved on, but I couldn't tear my eyes away. It wasn't just about the attack anymore, it was about how everything was unraveling in public view. There was no hiding now. And I thought about the people at April's work. What would they say when they saw her? Would they even recognize her anymore? She had been the polished, composed woman, always smiling, always in control, and now she was nothing more than a walking reminder of her own lies. A sick part of me felt a surge of satisfaction. She had brought this on herself. But another part, the part of me that once loved her, the part that remembered what we used to be, felt something different. There wasn't guilt exactly, but there was a strange sense of completion. The game was over. She had lost everything. And so at Steve, I had won, but the victory was hollow. A few days passed, and April didn't contact me again. I half expected her to try, to beg me for help, but she didn't. Maybe she finally realized there was nothing left to say. Maybe she understood that the George who had once loved her was gone, buried beneath the ruins of our marriage. Then, one afternoon, I got a text. It wasn't from her, though. It was from my real estate agent. The house had sold. Into Salpershadley. Full cash offer. The message read, "It's done. Congratulations." And I looked around the house one last time, taking in the silence. The walls that had once been filled with our memories, our wedding, for trips together, the milestones of our lives, were now bare. It didn't feel like home anymore. It was just a shell, a place where two people had lived and lied to each other. I decided to burn the rest of it. Literally. I gathered everything that was left of her wedding photos, the gifts, the small tokens of a life that no longer existed, and took them to the backyard. And I built a fire and watched as the flames consumed them. The pictures curled and blackened, the memories turning to ash. But I felt final, like a weight had been lifted from my chest. This wasn't just the end of my marriage. So it was the end of who I had been. The man who trusted blindly, who loved without question. So it's gone now too. But by the time the fire died down, it was almost dusk. I stared into the embers, feeling a strange sense of peace. So it was over. All of it. April, the lies, the betrayal burned away. A week later, I heard from a mutual friend that April had moved out of town. She couldn't stay here anymore, not after everything that happened. I wasn't surprised. There was no place for her in the city. Everyone knew now. The tattoos, the scandal with Steve, it had all become public knowledge. And Steve, he wasn't going to be making any more work trips for a while. He was still recovering from the attack, and word was he was considering leaving the country too, probably for the best. They had each other, I supposed, but what did it matter now? I never figured out who attacked them. That part still gnawed at me, but only slightly. Whatever it was, they had done what I wasn't willing to do. They had taken my revenge a step further. It was as if fate had stepped in to finish the job. I had my theories, of course. Maybe Steve had crossed the wrong person in his professional life. Maybe it was some pissed-off lover of his from the past. Maybe it was just random violence in the wrong place at the wrong time. But whoever they were, they had delivered a kind of justice that felt fitting. It wasn't my doing, but I wasn't sorry it happened. In the end, I got what I wanted. I got my freedom. The house was sold, the money was in my account, and April was out of my life for good. I was done playing the nice guy, the one who stayed quiet, the one who let things happen to him. I walked away with everything, and she was left with nothing but the marks on her skin and the memories of what she had lost. As I packed my last box and loaded it into the car, I glanced back at the house one final time. So I didn't feel a pang of nostalgia or regret, just closure. I was ready to move on, to start again, somewhere new. Somewhere far from this place and the ghosts that lingered here. So I drove away that afternoon, leaving behind the ashes of my old life. The road stretched out ahead of me, wide open and full of possibilities. And for the first time in a long time, I felt free.